Hello, welcome to the July 14th, 2026 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you've not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can simply send questions in advance. Let me mute my monitor computer. You can send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply send your question and mention it in the live chat field. We will go through all the questions chronologically as asked. If you don't see an immediate response to your query or your question, you can just simply, we will go through them all chronologically. So if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. Just kind of slows down the process. You should have an index of all of the topics that are covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field of the live stream, so you can navigate afterwards to find particular topics. And if you wanted to search for topics, we've covered over 45,000 topics in 2,000 hours. You can go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that site. So it's a great resource. You can just kind of type in and search by year. So if you're looking for a question on particular topics, you could do that. We have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. They are not Steinberg employees. They just do it to make it a better community experience. We want to extend our gratitude to them. We also wanted to give a special extra round of thanks to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host today. I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, in the United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. Okay, so we see Stefan joining from Sweden. Thanks for joining us. We see Adam Langford joining from Bedfordshire in the UK. We have Anton Welling joining from the Netherlands, just meters away from the German border. And he has a question. Hello, Greg. I'm wondering, I imported Music XML, created in Dorco, but it seems like Cubase does not play back the repetitions. Is there something I missed? I don't think that the Music XML would carry over the playing techniques for a particular instrument with repetitions. So let's start at one in Dorco here. If you're not familiar, so let's say if I have playing repetitions on this trumpet event here where we see the repetitions. So if we play this back, so let's say if we start here. So usually Music XML doesn't include playing techniques. So this may trigger, depending on the library, it may just sometimes it would trigger once you put a symbol on, it would trigger a different articulation based on the playback techniques in Dorco, and that's often going to be translated better with MIDI files. But when we deal with Music XML, generally Music XML is more kind of the graphic picture roughly, so I don't think it's going to contain and transfer over, so we may see those visually, but we may have to just simply enter them in. So let's say I'm in Dorco now, and let me export this as Music XML, and we'll just do just our trumpet part here. Okay. New project. So to carry over a lot of the playing techniques, you might have to, do it as a standard MIDI file. But let me just come over. Okay, so we'll get the notes that are kind of translated over, and let's look at it in the score editor so we can see that the repetitions are applied here, but I don't think it's going to play back with those particular repetitions, just like we don't necessarily have it automatically carry over like what instrument was being used. So different stuff like that. So let me just load up a trumpet part and we'll copy this event over. Let's do a quick iconic sketch. Yeah, so I don't think that that information is actually going to be included. So while we see it visually, so you know the concept here is to visually make sure that all of the particular scores, you know, is transferred over. But the playing techniques, you might have to export it as a standard MIDI file so that the if it's triggering articulations, that those articulations are included for, so you can match it up with the particular instruments. So just kind of more of a limitation of the music XML format in that regard. All right, so we see Klaus checking in from Malmo, Sweden. Great to have you on. Great to see Jazz Dude on as well. All right, I'm just going to check to see. I just see no sound from playback. Just make sure. I'll exit out Dorico real quickly. We just see if I have some playback here. I'll just check momentarily. All right, gonna go to my monitoring computer. So it seems like that's good on my monitoring computer, but let me know if I have any audio issues. So thanks for leaving the comment. All right, so we see Beverly Beatty joining from Vancouver, Canada. Thanks for being online with us. We have Lav Pran Meta Scores. Says greetings from India. Got to hear some beautiful Indian music Friday night. Got to see A.R. Rahman perform with the National Symphony Orchestra. Very enjoyable concert. You got to go backstage, meet him, hang out for a bit. All right. So we see the bang sounds good. Saying hello, chat. All right. So we see, is it possible to enter a fifth chord, a power chord in the chord track, for example, C5? All right. So I think, you know, technically a power chord isn't a chord. So it's not going to, you know, chord by definition is three voices. But let's say if we come over, there are some provisions for changing, you know, so let's say we want to do like a C5 chord, right? You know, but technically it's not, you know, it's not a chord, but if we go into your Cubase settings, if you want it to indicate visually, so we'll come over here to our event display. Let's go to chords and pitches. Let's do a custom chord symbol. So we'll say, okay, let's do new custom chord. And we will just say default, and say I'll just do major 3 chord here. Okay, so let's see if we can. We'll put, so we may have to kind of define a different chord. Then we could, I think, display it as a 5, as it's a dyad instead of a triad. So let's come over again. So let's say if I set it to all right, so let's say I'll just do so you could define a, maybe a chord that's like a really odd. So let's say if we come over here to the settings, so you could just define like a really obscure chord, like, okay, I want it to be a flat 9, a 9, and a 6, 13, and then just say that you want to display this. So we say, let's do, let me just see if we're able to just do just a 5th. But you could play around and come up with some type of chord spelling. And then, once we go, not to the key commands, but again to your settings, just say, okay, I want, a C major 3rd with flat 5th and a 9th or whatever, and we'll display that as a C5 chord. But technically, and I would stand by the decision that I know that people want to often indicate that, so there is a way to do that by doing a new custom chord symbol. But like a C G C isn't a chord, technically. So, all right. So you see Danny checking in. All right. Danny B 6618. All right. We see Matt Elston joining from the UK. All right. The Bang sounds good. Says greetings from a chilly evening in Cape Town, South Africa. We have Soren joining from Sweden. Great. We have Tim Weinheimer joining from Mission Viejo, California. Uno Momento wants people to whack the like button. Always good. And Jazz Dude just sending a link for the Dorco trial. And for all Cubase users, you could also check out, there is a kind of a lighter version of Dorco called Dorco SE, which is free. So every Cubase user should do that. That kind of dabbles in notation as well. Okay, so we see Adam Langford says it's playing fine now, Greg. So we see Jazzy says no audio issues. I was having a video display issue on my OBS right before, so I was kind of panicking about that, but I thought I checked the audio. All right, so we see Jackie Barr just says, will there be a trial version of Spectral Layers 13? I did the demo version 12, but didn't purchase. I'd like to see if it now does what I was needing. So generally, sometimes the trial versions don't come out initially at release. So sometimes the trial versions, so generally there's going to be, I would say that there's probably a trial version. I'm not sure. I haven't heard of any definitive dates as to when the trial would be released. But, kind of keep checking back on it. So sometimes it may be like a month or so or a few weeks after release. All right, so you see Tim Weinheimer says, I've been using Wavelab 13 Pro. I found when importing a commercial CD with a CD wizard, you could put a number in front of the track name. Very helpful, time saving. Thanks for that. Yeah, I connected my Apple CD player to my new MacBook, and it wasn't recognized by my new MacBook. So I had it ready for Friday's live stream. All right, we see Tim K. as Sabertooth Bicycle joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat buddy is waving a paw hello to my cat, and he's ready for learning new things. All right, so we see this Ninja Scared. Is there any plan to update the chord track so I can identify and display the chords I'm playing in real time rather than only showing them during playback in the MIDI editor? So I don't think that, the chord track is intended for kind of real time, population of chords, because it could be like some analysis that's involved with that. If you want to see what chords you're playing in real time, there is, if you go to a MIDI plugin, I think if we go to kind of an unexpected choice, let's say the context gate. So if you want to see the chords that you're playing, see if it's just come over here to one of the MIDI plugins. Let me just find it here. Different plugin. Let me just take a quick look. Goes to context gate. All right, so say. So at this point, like whatever chords I play in, let me just open up, show it here. You can see the kind of chord display indicated there. But the chord track, I don't think, like in context, that the chord track would, like, it makes sense to really show that, because the chord track could also be modulating all of the other parts as well. So when we're doing, like as we're playing, let's say if I modulate these chords, let's say if I populate this track, we'll just come over here to the project, and let's just we'll do a chords to MIDI. And now, kind of as we play as we play back, we could see the chords. So I will just come over here. Let me activate the status line. And then you could just see the chords indicated right here as you're working on your project. But, you know, if you have it automatically populate, if the chord track is showing it in real time, if you have audio that's set to follow the chords, you may not want like your drum parts automatically modulating to the chords that you're doing in real time. All right, you see Jazz Dude, probably a quote from the Steinberg website about the spectral layers 13 says, if you're going to take it for a test spin, wait a little longer. The free spectral layers trial will be released soon. All right, so we have White Whistle Bondrude. Hello, my master meter most of the time is peaking very fast, close to zero with only 3 or 4 tracks. Having difficulty making a soundtrack to sound big. Any tips? The drums kick, make it peak fast too. So, you know, check out the, you know, I probably don't have a great example. Let me see if I could open up. Something that may not have like kick drums, but if it's, we'll do kind of a soundtracky type thing. I have one we could use here. And Carlos Chafin. All right, so let's say if I'm here, so let's say if like the timpani is, in this case, maybe causing like spikes. Okay, so let's say if I have my timpani track, let me just come over to the virtual instrument. I think we have this mostly in. All right, so let's say if I have my timpani and it's going to its own output. So let's say our timpani here is causing, you know, I don't have a great project to show this, but if your timpani is the one that's causing, I'll just open up a quick timpani, a dedicated instrument for timpani here. I think we're using the Howling Symphonic Orchestra in this example. Let me just load it in percussion. All right, so we'll just have our timpani here. I'll just copy my timpani part. Okay. All right, so let's say we kind of have our percussion doing something like that. We look at the meters. You know, you could always bring the volume of the percussion if you're kind of treating it as an audio source here. You know, you could apply just if you come over here to the compression and say, okay, now I want to do, let's say, even the standard compressor so that when it gets to a certain threshold, that the signal will get compressed. So let's say as we rewind just a little bit here, so without changing the volume so much, we get compressed. So that's without. So compression on the source can kind of, you know, keep your dynamics in check. You know, if it's going to be MIDI, you know, also just being able to, you know, go directly to the velocity. So, you know, depending on your velocity, maybe decreasing, this could change kind of maybe the characteristics depending on the timpani instrument or sample that you're using. So that, you know, so sometimes you may have different dynamics, different samples are triggered, but, you know, try velocity first to see if you could bring that down and still have the same characteristic of the sound. If not, then you could run that to a separate audio track, and from that separate audio track, apply the compressor. So let's, again, come here. So that's with compression. Without, you can find a kind of happy medium. So, you know, try, you know, working to see if you can fix it with velocity, may give you kind of the best overall control. If not, you can isolate it and run like that bass drum through a compressor, and that way you can still kind of get the impact, but control the dynamics within the context of the mix. Great. So we see from La Pran Meta Scores says, cool, got it, Greg, thanks. All right, so wonderful. See Tiago joining from Brazil. See DB Music Production says, congratulations on your new position with Steinberg, Greg. So thank you very much. I had my 34-year-old apprentice, my 34-year apprenticeship. I finally get to work for Steinberg directly now. Really happy about that. It's been incredibly wonderful. All right, so we have John Barry joining from Devon, England. Okay, so we see from Anton Welling, says, I'm sorry, Greg, with repetitions, I meant the repeats of multiple bars and go to the second time to box 2. Okay. Yeah, so again, I don't think, let me see if there is a function in the score editor for playback of repeats. Is sometimes the score editor here. Yeah, so I don't think that the repeats are going to just take a Look here. Yes, I don't think that the visual repeats will automatically translate. So again, like a music, so if you have like first and second endings, well, you could do that in Cubase. It's going to be more of a visual representation. With that, I could take a quick look. Don't think. There's going to be anything that these are going to be more visual references. But yeah, so I don't think that the music XML, think of it as kind of like importing a picture, but it may not contain like the first and second repeats and have those repeats play back, because this is going to be kind of a repetition of the it's going to be just a quick repetition of the actual like the visual part, but it may not work and translate into non-linear playback. I'm going to make one quick adjustment for my mouse. Hang on just 1 second. All right. Sorry about that. Now my mouse will work better. So, but I'll play around with it. And if you want to send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to see if I come across anything for repeats. Okay, so we see from Jazz Dude, it says, what about the quarter MIDI tool for power chords? So I don't think that the quarter tool, while it allows us to kind of, trigger chords for particular instruments. So if I come over here, let's say we come over to the quarter, like we could play back different instruments. So let's say, so just playing one note. But I don't think that that will actually show like a C5 chord in the chord track. That was my understanding of the question, but if not, please correct me. All right, so we see from Guy0919 says, no questions today. Just want to ask how you are, Greg. So I'm doing great, enjoying summer, and just, happy to be starting on a new career journey directly with Steinberg. So it's wonderful. And I have to give credit to everyone at Steinberg, make me feel incredibly welcome and going above and beyond to make everything very smooth. All right, Tim Weinheimer asks, I have an actual Wavelab project, Greg. Can demonstrate cutting a live concerts into tracks and fades so I can burn a CD with individual track numbers so the client can have individual track CDs. Yeah. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so let's say we have like one long recording and we want to convert that to audio CDs. See if I just have I'll render this out quickly. Okay, so let's say I have a live recording like this where I have multiple songs and it's one kind of continuous or contiguous recording. So I'm going to take this particular project here. Okay, I'm going to make a new audio montage. Okay, say new audio montage here. Great, and I want to take this particular track and we'll drag this over to this montage. All right, so we want to take this into different like, you know, CD track starts and stuff like that. So let's come over here. So let's say as we listen to our file, we'll come over here to our master section. Sitting by the phone, waiting for that to ain't everything I need, but she ain't you. All right, so what I want to do now is just kind of say, okay, this is, I want to take like this whole song and let's say, okay, you know, and I listen and I can just at this point come right over here. All right, so let's say this is what I want. So let's come over to insert, and I think we could choose just our CD markers here. So we could do generic. Let's do loop markers. I think that there are CD. I think there's okay. So right here, I think we could do create a title selection. Right, so we have kind of our markers there. So let's say, okay, we have a little bit of audience. Right, and we say, okay, this is our marker here. So I think we could, again, just come over to place, kind of just see if there's, I think, yeah, it's a, right, and let's do one more. I thought it used to be called CD markers, maybe an earlier version. Okay, I already have one for that, so let's come over here. All right. Now that I have these markers, I think I could do an album wizard, and let's see if that. All right, let me just see if there's. Come over to the functions. Let's see if there's. Let me just start this from scratch. All right, so let's see if we come here. There you don't overlap. Great, so let's see if we do. Okay, yeah, so all you to do is just kind of go through over here. So find your start and end points, make sure that they don't overlap, and click here, and then you'll see them automatically be populated in the album field. So you could give it a name. So once we have again over here, name the files. And then at this point, you could just go to edit CD text, the metadata, and you go to write your CD, and just come right over here and write the DDP. And you could also just make sure, like, before you burn, that you could check CD conformity, and then you'll be kind of all set right there. So just kind of select, you'll see kind of the red markers, select that, and then that would build you'd see that those changes reflected on your album. So those markers are basically defining exactly where your CD track and end points are from the montage. Let me know if that's helpful for you, Tim. Great. So we see Andrew Fox, or Fox Andrew, saying hi from Ireland. Thanks for joining us. There just a year ago. Wonderful time. Great. Sounds by Timo is just saying Sheboygan is hot. Weinheimer wants more timpani drums. So So Tommy Vallon, hi Greg, can you show us how to separate stems in Spectral Layers 13? So you separate all drums and lead and backing vocal, etc. Yeah. So let's come over here. Okay, we'll just do a new example in Spectral Layers 13 here. So let me just do new project. I have some like really good ones, but I can't really play them for copyright reasons. See if this is like a mixed down file. All right, so let's take this, and I've never done the unmixing with this file in 13, so we'll come over. This may take a couple minutes, but we'll come over here. Let's go to our extensions. We'll open up Spectral Layers 13. Go to our mix module, so we'll just choose to unmix song. The guitar, piano. There's some brass in this. Give it a couple minutes. So again, what this is going to do is, kind of take the actual, basically unmixing the, so we're taking a 2-track mix and unmixing the stems. So you have some functionality for this inside of Cubase already, but we also have the capability of using Spectral Layers, which has really great quality for this. And I'll see if while we're doing this, if we could answer some other questions while this is going on. All right, great to see Rick from Bratman Studio on from Whittier, California. See Rick just giving kudos to Jazz Dude for all of his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. All right. All right, so we see Razel Zamini joining from Denmark. I see a question from Anton Welling about the latency. We can get to that. Generally, latency can be set in 2 different ways. I'll show this as soon as we're done rendering this particular file, but latency can be in conjunction with your audio interface. So some interfaces will have effects with built-in 0 latency, some other interfaces. So generally using like a Mac audio core audio driver or an ASIO driver on a Windows platform can make a difference. Now, latency can be affected by 2 different aspects. So it could actually be affected by the buffer for your audio interface, and also if you have a lot of effects on your system. So as we run lots of plugins in a mix, you may notice that you can consider it kind of like a plugin tax, if you will, is, the tax for running like often high quality plugins could mean that their latencies are higher. So when the latencies are higher, that can contribute overall kind of cumulatively to the overall latency of your system. So Sometimes when you're tracking, you may have an option for direct monitoring. And what direct monitoring will allow you to do is to kind of hear the tracks play back, but as you're recording through the system, the track that you're recording on will be fed directly from the input to the output, and that will bypass any effect plugins. So if you have like compressors and EQs and reverbs, you may not hear that, but when you do that, that has minimal latency on it. So just, so if you could let us know like what audio interface you have, if it's a brand new project without a lot of tracks and without plugins, do you still have the latency? Then that would probably be the buffer size of the audio interface. And also, remember that plugins, as you instantiate plugins, those plugins can cause latency as well. Great. So we see Michael Teams is at the rehab place with a friend and will listen. He's getting his friend settled in from the hospital, so hope your friend is doing well. Wish her well for all of us at the live streams. All right, so we'll just about 2 minutes left in this song. 2 minutes 49 seconds. Great. Just let this continue to do its unmixing. So again, what this is going to do is from a 2-track file using Spectral Layers 13, which just released 2 weeks ago. We see that as what we're able to do is to kind of separate the instruments. I often kind of liken this process to like taking the eggs out of a cake after it's been baked. So see what the results are on this particular track that are under 2 minutes. Winding down here, so we see from Anton about the latency. He says he'll try this. By the way, he's using a Focusrite Claret 4 pre. Okay, so I'll show you some of the things as we get to this. So Bratman Studios just asking, hi Greg, if I have Spectral Layers 11, is there an upgrade to 13 for us dedicated Cubasers? So yeah, there's an upgrade path. Let's take a look at it here, see if we can find it. So say you come here to the updates and upgrades. Do the update from Spectral Layers 11. So you don't have to buy it again. You can just simply update. So if you have Spectral Layers 12 to 89 and 129 from version 11. Okay, so our unmixing is done. So let's go ahead and take a quick listen to it. All right. So when we do this, what we can see now is we're going to have all of our different layers. So we'll go ahead and play this. This is a pretty complex mix. It's my friend Clay Ostwald's little side project he did called 7 Crossing. So as we play this back. So now if I wanted to just take my there's our drums and percussion. And then if you wanted to at that point unmix the, drums, I won't necessarily spend a lot of time doing this, but we could take our drums at this point and go to your modules and we could say, let's unmix. And at this point we could say unmix drums. So let's say, see how long this can take. It's usually quicker. But then once we do our drums, we could take the particular drums and unmix the toms from the kick and snare as well. So at that point, you can see, and your cymbals. So it's not just taking the drums, but then we could take it a second level and unmix the individual drum parts within that. So I'll see if we can do this, and we'll give this another minute. Let me see if I could jump to maybe Nuendo to show some of the latency stuff while this is processing. All right, so I'll just open up Nuendo in the foreground here, and this will be the same functionality, but this will allow me to show stuff while Cubase, while Spectral Layers is doing its magic. So again, with latency, two things that cause latency are going to be the buffer size of the audio interface and also the plugins. So let's say if I'm doing a new project and we'll create empty and we want to track all of our processes here. So we add an audio track. So as we come over here, so we go to record, we could see that at this point, since we don't have any plugins, the latency is going to be determined by the audio interface drivers. So when I come over here, we could go to the control panel and we can see that at a buffer size of 256, I have 7.891 milliseconds of latency. So that's usually, like most people can track pretty well, under 12 milliseconds. And there's a little latency monitor utility that comes in Cubase. So if I want to, for instance, look at my mixer, we could see the latency. Now, as I would go to add plugins on a particular track, so let's say, okay, on this track or on another track, we have a plugin such as our, let's say, a multiband compressor. Okay. And let's say if we have, this is one that has a known kind of high latency because it's so sophisticated, is going to be the, like the vocal chain. So when we see this, now that we have our setup sections, and the latency is turned on, we can see that this track now has 383 milliseconds of latency. And we could see that the multiband compressor is going to have 123 milliseconds, and we have 236.3 milliseconds of latency on the vocal chain. Now, if we don't want to necessarily come over here, when I disable these plugins by holding down the Alt, we can see that this latency disappears. Now, if we're tracking on a particular, if we're recording on a particular track and we want the high latency plugins to be disabled while tracking, the one thing that you can try, if it's going to be kind of latency that's caused by plugins, is just to come to the lower left-hand corner and there's a constrained delay compensation. So if we come over here, you could enable the constrained delay compensation, and then as plugins are as plugins, as we go to record, what this could do, we notice that this will bypass plugins that have a higher latency. So you could try just to come over here, and on the processing track, it's going to bypass those plugins. On the track that you're capturing, it'll bypass those particular plugins so that you can just come right over here and bypass and record. And then when you're done recording, just simply click this button again, and that would turn all of the plugins on. So latency again is going to be caused by the buffer size and potential plugins. If it's plugins, the first thing I would try is just activating the constrain delay compensation button in the lower left-hand corner here. All right, so let's take a look back at our Cubase. So if the question wanted to unmix the drums. All right, so it looks like we are done with the drum unmixing. So right now we've taken this 2-track song, and as we play it back, so we have some toms. Let's get to the snare. So I could mix just all of the drums by themselves. Now once I'm here, I could also just say, okay, like if I have a 2-track mix, we could also choose to do, like I want more bass from the 2-track mix, or I want less bass overall. So you could come over here and say, okay, I want less piano or more piano. So you could remix the volume levels as well. And I'll just save this as a song. Well, so that. So does a great job of being able to split apart different parts. And then if you wanted like a particular, like, the vocals to be dragged over, you can just come right over here and drag the layer from the project. And now you could have that in the project as well. So if I wanted to add more effects on this track, so let's say I wanted to add a delay to the vocals. So now you're able to do like further effect processing if you want to do an unmix, but you didn't necessarily have the capabilities of having the original multi-track recordings. Do that. All right. So let me go ahead and close this project. All right, thanks for your patience on that. All right, so we see a further comment from Anton on the latency. Says the only plugin I'm using is a reverb plugin as a send. Is that causing latency as well? So generally all the plugins can be compounded for latency. So it's just kind of the physics of, and it's every program runs into the same latency issues. So. All right, so we see from Tim Weinheimer, just says unmixing drums is so cool. Right. Reverend Howell says, "Hi from Sirgar Simru. Thanks for joining us." It says, "I have Cubase 14 Pro. My chum has Cubase 8. Is there a way we can share projects to work on them independently?" So, going from 8 to 14, like if you save features that have been introduced in Cubase 14 that aren't in 8, so the projects are going to be compatible. And it's usually easier to go from an earlier version to a later version. Um, the project file format is the same, but if you're doing stuff, features that have been introduced, in 9, 9.5, 10, 10.5, 11, 12, 13, like those functions may not translate well when you're going back. What you could do is, come over, if it's to the point where, you just need to be able to, collaborate. You could go to your file menu, export, and do an export audio mix down. And from that point, you could just send him stems that could include the plugins. So if we come over to your project, we say, okay, we want to do multiple audio files. Let me activate this project here. So we could just say, okay, I want to do like my export audio mix down. And now what you could do is just do a very, select all of the, all of your audio, of all your effects, and you could render these as an audio file. And then when then you could share audio files, very easily back and forth. But it could be if you're utilizing plugins that don't exist in his version, it may sound different on his end. The MIDI information, the audio information will show up and play, but it may not carry over all the things that you're doing in 14 that aren't available in 8.5 or in 8. Great. Thanks for joining us, Reverend Howell, on the live stream. Great to see Parabot 2 joining from Australia. Great. Let me see. Anton Welling just says, I think I'll look my buffer size then. Thank you, Greg. All right, we have John Costigan joining from a tropical Wisconsin. Great. So we see Tommy Valen just says, thanks, Greg. So welcome. All right, let me jump to question that was mailed in. So we had a question, how to change the default quick control assignments for a plugin. Okay, so when we're working with plugins, one of the things is that we're going to have, something called quick controls. So let me just switch to a different project here. Okay, so let's say if we come over here, we go to a, so let's say we come over here to find like a retrolog instance. So once we're in a retrolog instance, we have quick controls. So generally the quick controls are going to be like the 8 go-to parameters in a particular instrument. So once we come over here and we could, if you go to the upper right-hand corner, we could see what the QCs are. So we see that these are kind of the 8 go-to parameters for an instrument. Now, obviously, instruments and plugins may have, more than 8 parameters. These are generally going to be what we see by default is the first 8 parameters that the plugin has assigned for automation purposes. So as part of the VST specification, so they say these are kind of the 8, go-to parameters. Now, if we wanted to change these, so when I go to my control surface and we're doing something, like with my MIDI remote here in my lower zone, and we just come over to my nano control. So I have my knobs here controlling my quick controls. So as soon as I come over, let's say to my synth bass part, that when I move the knob here, we see that reflected there. So these are kind of assigned by default. Now, so any of the VST3 plugins, you just would open up the QC here, and we could assign these. So these are all the available parameters that are automatable within this particular plugin. So we can see not only that, but we could also have all of our MIDI CC messages. So we can come right over here. So we have, probably 200 different parameters that are assignable. Now, if I click on the L button, I can say, you know what, I want the fine tune. So we click on L for learn, and then I can say, I want this button for quick control 1. So now I've reassigned that. I will uncheck the L, and now as I adjust this, instead of doing the cutoff, it's going to do fine tune when I move the knob. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize, if you want to be able to access multiple banks of quick controls, what you could do is come over here to what we call the remote editor. So we'll go to our remote control editor, and here we could actually have multiple banks of controls. So let's say we have 200 parameters. We could now come over here and assign different banks for the plugin controls right here. So you can see that, we have, 54 banks. So it looks like we have 320 or 400 and 432. So 426 plugin parameters that are accessible right here. And then we could set up our remote control to switch to bank A, bank page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, etc. So if you don't like the particular remote control assignments that the instrument or plugin is providing, again, just come right over here, open up the plugin. We could change which 8. And if you wanted to configure like banks of 8 that make sense to be grouped together, go to the little drop down menu. You can go to the remote control editor, and then once you go to the remote control editor, here is where you can define all of your, and there's a learn function here, just like we showed previously, but now we could go through, 54 banks of 8 controllers. And if you have 16 faders or knobs on your controller, you could define it to be, 16 choices instead of 8. But, quick controls are going to work in banks of 8. And then you could use the generic remote or the MIDI remote to automatically switch between banks to have access to all the additional parameters right there. Okay, jump back, see if we have some more live questions come in. Okay. All right, so we see just a comment from Tim Weinheimer, says Spectral Layers 13 has so many new unmixed features, really cool. I haven't explored them all yet, just looks like fun. All right. And we see Jazz Dude just makes a comment about recording the saxophone with the instrument. Says you can hear the instrument direct into room, so I wonder why it's a problem. Keyboard via MIDI controller or electric guitar through direct inputs, a different thing. So I guess if you're recording with a backing track and you're listening to the backing track, one thing to do, I know like sometimes there's, and I think most wind players and I think saxophone players can be guilty of this, singers, obviously, where you want a courtesy reverb for your tracking because it's kind of inspirational to hear the reverb sound. So, on a lot of interfaces, I'm not sure if the Claret has it, but I know like even in like, the $200 Yamaha interfaces or the previously branded Steinberg interfaces, like the UR series, that when you come over here, we could go to, so let's go to, let's say your audio connections. And let's say, okay, I want this input here is going into my input 1 of my UR interface. So I'm going to just add an audio track and let's set the input to input 1. And if so right now I could come over here with like the Steinberg interfaces or the Yamaha interfaces, then I could just see, and there may be an equivalent. It may be like in a separate like control panel program. So for your Focusrite, you may have a separate utility for this. So, but when I come over here with the Steinberg or Yamaha interfaces, they're completely integrated. So I could now come over here and we could have different, if I wanted to have like pitch correction as an insert, but we also have sends. So I could just say, okay, let's come over here, and the interface itself has a built-in reverb, and this is powered by DSP on the audio interface. And so when you are tracking with this reverb, there's no additional latency. That latency is going to be handled by the DSP chip on the audio interface. So see if your Claret has onboard DSP, and if it's accessible. Sometimes with third-party tools, you may have to go into your mixer, and then if you come over here, you could say, okay, I need to add, let's say, a reverb. So now I may have reverb on my voice as I do this. And this reverb, we don't hear any latency because it's being powered by the audio hardware as well. So there's no perceptible latency. So see if your interface has built-in DSP powered effects, and that may help with latency issues as well. So just something to be aware of. Something kind of cool with the Yamaha and Steinberg audio interfaces. It makes it unique. Right. So we just see from Anton, it says no latency problem in all DAWs because Cubase is such an advanced DAW. There could be some kind of solution for his problem. All right, Anton says he's never tried to direct monitoring, but that's an idea. So again, you won't hear the effects, but if like latency is very crucial for your performance, then the effects will, be really helpful for, so at that point you could just simply, record without the effects, and then, it'll sound better. If you make it sound great without effects, if you add a little reverb afterwards, it's probably only going to sound better in the long run. All right, let me go to another question that was mailed in advance. Why is it that when I hit record from my keyboard shortcut, nothing happens, but I can hit play and then record, and then it is all fine? Okay, so we get this question from kind of a noted composer. All right, and they're just running into an issue with general recording when they go to hit the keyboard shortcut for record, that it wasn't necessarily doing a count in, it was just kind of waiting for something to happen. All right, so if you're in that case, it's probably going to be that external sync is activated. So now when I hit record, it could be that it's waiting for external sync. So if you go to your transport, and this could depend on your project synchronization setup. So let's say, okay, it's waiting for MIDI timecode, and you go to hit play, and it just sits there, and I'm almost mocking you. All right, so if you're in this situation, you could hit play, and then it goes into record. But just hitting record, it'll just sit there and wait, and that's because you told Cubase to work directly with external timecode. So it's waiting for the timecode to come in, and then as soon as it's activated, as soon as it's seeing timecode, Cubase is following the timecode from, we'll call it the master device. So at that point, if it's not seeing timecode, it's going to wait. So right now we have it set to look for MIDI timecode. I come over here, I hit record. Doesn't seem like anything is working. And so make sure, if you're in this situation, that we actually just come over here and go to the transport and make sure that external sync is turned off. And when you go to your external sync, this is how, if you wonder why, people need to use external synchronization. So in the old days, before, videos could be played on computers, like film composers would often get a video cassette, sometimes on VHS, or like 3/4 inch video machine. And one of the audio tracks, they would often have dialogue on the left channel, and they would have SMPTE timecode on the right channel. So what SMPTE timecode would be would be a timecode, so that as you hit play, that timecode was fed into the computer. The computer would then determine its position based on the timecode. So we can see that when we come over here to our time display formats, that we see bars and beats. And we also see that we could have time code. And generally, if you're in Europe, you have 25 frames per second. In America, you have 30 frames per second. And then there's drop frames, so it could be very complex. There's different frame rates for how the video is divided. So you have to be kind of aware of that. But the old days, you would always have to start the process, the sequencer, by hitting play on a video deck, or if you were working in a studio, like one track 24 would have time code on it. Generally, it's going to be the last track, so it doesn't bleed into the other tracks, which is pretty typical. So you could hear like some time code on track 23 if you recorded it on 24. Then when you hit play on the the video deck or the multi-track machine, the time code is fed into a SMPTE to MIDI time code converter. And then Cubase, when you stopped and started the machine, Cubase would follow the timing of that source. So if you run into the situation where you don't have, when you go to hit record and it's sitting there kind of almost looking at you like it's making fun, just come over to the transport and make sure that external sync isn't activated. Okay, let's go back some. Okay, so we see a question from John Barry. It says, "Hi Greg, when a project has mix automation, I find out to turn off the mix automation when using solo. I would find I would find an option to bypass mix automation when using solo. Really useful. Cheers. So make sure that. So when it has mix automation, I find I have to turn off mix automation when using solo. Be helpful to bypass my mix automation. All right. So the one thing that you could do is realize that let's say that if we have solo, so in other tracks or in automation, that the other tracks may go into mute. And then when you go into mute, that those mutes may be written as automation. So let's take a look at this case here. So we'll just open up like a multi-track band project. We'll come over and say, okay, I want this to, so say I have all these tracks record enabled. All right, so let's say I solo the kick drum. All right, now let's say if we look at our automation for the other tracks, did we write mute automation? So let's see. So we're here. So let's say we have all these. All right, so say if I solo another track here. So, see if some of the other tracks are being, when you solo, so like we saw this track was, let me see if the track needs to be selected maybe. So let's say if I select all of these tracks, so it could be that, you're inadvertently writing mute automation. Doesn't seem like it's doing now, but, I could see in some scenarios like this, the mute automation was written into the particular track. So, one of the things that you can do is, come over, let's go to the automation panel. And if you wanted to come over here and say, suspend writing on mute automation. So, I think that is often kind of the culprit. Says to turn off mix automation when using solo. I would find an option to bypass mix automation when solo. So I think what that's going to do again is that the other tracks may get muted. So you could just suspend writing of mute automation. So let me know if that makes sense and if that works for you. Some people would also use like the listen bus as another method if you had existing mute automation. So you could suspend writing but not reading if you have existing automation. So let me know if that makes sense for what your situation that you're in, John. Great. I think we had another question that was mailed in, so let's jump there. Okay, so we had a question. Why do I hear clicks in playback after rendering an audio file from a virtual instrument? Come here. Jump back to our other project. And this person had sent a movie with kind of an audio example, and it was a little hard to ascertain exactly what was going on with it, but let's see if we could recreate it. So let's say I have this cello part here, and we'll listen to cello. Activate this project. All right, so I'll just take a portion of this and let's render the file in place. So we come over here, we'll just do a quick edit menu to render in place. In this case, when they did it, it just did dry. So we'll come over here. Okay, so now we have our rendered file. All right, so when we go to listen to the rendered file, now sometimes when you do this, I'll just turn this up just a little bit. You may, like when you're first starting, you may hear a little click or pop, and when you stop, so you can hear like an ever so subtle, like let's say if I was just soloing this, depending on where it's playing in the zero crossing point. And if that's the case, you know, so like when you're starting and stopping, excuse me 1 second. When you're starting or stopping, you may hear a little bit of a click depending on where that audio is in the waveform. And just to kind of show this, and I'll just kind of zoom in on the amplitude here. So if you're starting playback, like right from this point, you may hear a little pop or click depending on where the audio is playing back. There is a zero crossing option that some people think will actually take this, and we go to snap to zero crossing. And what that's going to allow you to do is not necessarily snap the play position. So, but when I go to do an edit, such as when I cut, I can't cut right where that's at. I have to cut at a zero crossing. So, you know, make sure. So I can't cut like right there. It's going to, you know, place the cut at a zero crossing point. But if it's like the little clicks that you hear, you know, on playback, you could try to turn on the auto fades settings, and you could just say, okay, in this track, every time I do, and what this will do is place a 10 millisecond fade anytime that you're starting or playing back. So you don't hear any of the clicks here because it's going to do a very short fade in and fade out. So if you're just, you know, cutting the audio up a bunch of times instead of having to do crossfades, you could technically do crossfades. But as we do this, even though we cut randomly, this will just do fade in and fade outs of each little segment, so that, and you could automatically do auto crossfades so that when you split at this point, you don't hear that fade. So if it's that little click that you may hear at the very beginning of playback, at that point, try to, you know, see if it's just the auto fade settings. And again, it's just wherever you stop the playback, it might immediately go back, not to the zero crossing, and the zero crossing is going to be, you know, for doing edits and not necessarily for like the transport playback position. So I kind of responded by email, so we'll see if we get any more clarity on that. All right, let's go to live, go back to see if we have more live questions. Great. All right, so we see from John Barry, says, yes, it's probably mute automation of tracks. It jumps out of solo because of the mute automation I use to suspend, but thanks for the tip hint on to use a selective suspend from the panel. So, all right, so we see from Rick Shaw, who just says, expression maps madness. All right, so let me know. We'll take a look at expression maps here. Let me know what you find maddening about it, or if it's cool, or what you want to do. I'll just revert this. Okay, so if you're dealing with like expression maps on particular instruments here, so let's say, okay, I want to take this cello part and we're trying to make this, so expression maps, if you're not familiar, many times when you open up a particular instrument, and this is often with, you will see this frequently with orchestral instruments, and we go to open up an instrument that we could have, different. So if I want to have staccato or legato patches, or if we wanted to do tremolo, all right, so we could switch between these different articulations. Now, instead of having to have a separate track, which is kind of the traditional method of doing this, you'd see film composers have like one violin and they may have shorts, longs, pits, tremolos, legato, sustains, spiccato. So they may have one instrument with like 6 or 7 different tracks, and then they would have to try to notate all those 6 or 7 tracks that would have, each of the tracks would have a different playing articulation. But now what we're able to do is to just come over and we could have what we call an expression map. Now, an expression map can be created a couple of different ways. So if we just double click on the event, we would see our expression map. And as we come over here, we can see that if you have if you click on the plus sign here, you can automatically, if it's a Hallian-based instrument, I believe East West supports this as well, it can automatically import the key switch information. So many of these articulations that we see in the instrument, if you hold down a low note out of range or a high note that's out of range of the instrument, that would send a key switch so that when you play, you hit this note, it's going to play back pizzicato. You hit this note, it's going to play back legato or spiccato. So when we go to our expression map here, we can just come over and say, okay, I want to take this, and we can see that, C, D sharp 0 plays sustain. That'll be your default. C0 will be staccato, pizzicato will be C sharp 0. So when you trigger these particular keys, this will automatically switch the instrument to go along with the particular desired articulation. So this way we could do this all on one single instrument. Now, as we work with the expression maps, and you could build, if your instrument isn't capable of automatically building expression maps, you can come right over here and just start a new expression map. So so you could give it a name. We'll say July 14th, and then we could add a sound slot. So you can say, okay, it's going to be for brass, and I want it to be open notes and we could assign an articulation with it. We could come over here, say we want, this is going to be a note on message from, and you could actually just double click in this field to select and hit the MIDI note, and that will assign the particular MIDI note for this articulation. And there's also different options here where you could do attack compensation time. So at this point, you could just say, I want to have this attack compensation automatically, so that some instruments may need 20 milliseconds before the sound actually sounds. By the time the bow moves the string or the breath goes through the oboe, that all of those particular sounds come in on time. So we could do the attack compensation for the different articulations. So now when we want to work with this inside of Cubase, we could go to your score editor. We could now say, okay, let's go to articulations. Now we could define articulations as a direction or an attribute. So an attribute is going to be set for particular notes. So let's say as we're playing this, I have spiccato selected, and then a direction. So an attribute is going to be designed for particular notes. So we could select notes, and directions will maintain that articulation until there's another articulation. So let's say if I want to come here, and now I want to switch some of these notes to pizzicato. So let's say, okay, I want this to go right over here. I want to switch to pizzicato and then back to spiccato there. So at this point, we can... So, and we could have your different articulations kind of automatically just switching instruments. So let's say on these notes here, I want maybe this articulation here. So we can see that, I could take different articulations, and we can say, okay, I want these notes here where we have attributes, and we can see our articulation here. So I want that to be staccato instead. So we can say, okay, for like those higher notes, we can just come over here, switch those notes, come here. So with this way, we could achieve kind of like the realism of how a string player would perform it. So that's what expression maps will allow you to do. So. All right. All right, so we see Parabot 2 just says, hi Greg, what's the best way to have two ARPs running at the same time with different patterns in Retrolog? All right, so I think that when we utilized Retrolog itself, it's going to be like Retrolog will have, I think, just one single pattern within its arpeggiator. So let's come over and say, okay, let's go to our synth bass. All right, so when I'm just going to hold down a single note here. Let's go to, we'll see this little icon here. So this is our arpeggiator page. We're going to turn this on, and there will be all sorts of great presets to work with. So say, okay. So I'm just holding down a single note, and we can see that we could. So I'm going to hold down a chord now. And so we could come over here. So, and we could have like this particular arpeggiator going on. But if you want it to run kind of parallel arpeggiators, let's see if we could do that. I think that we could probably do that directly within like the MIDI plugins instead, since we have a single arpeggiator here. And so let's say I want it, let's go to Apache under the MIDI plugins. Let's say, okay, I want this as, okay, so let's make this maybe like a quarter note. So sometimes I'm not sure if you want parallel or serial modulators, but I think that if we do this, we can make this serial. So I could take one arpeggiator and feed it into another arpeggiator. So let's say, all right, so let's say we have this arpeggiator on the right. We want this to be maybe 30-second notes. Let's see what this does. So if we make one, let's say we make this, we'll change the note length here to quarter notes as well. So we bypass this. We have quarter notes. And we bring in let's say we bypass this and we have 30-second notes. Let's make this 16ths. And now let's see what happens when we combine. So now we could get the quarter notes that are feeding into 16th note. And let's see what happens if we add another layer of an Apache, and let's make this we'll do half note triplets. So that way we could stack multiple arpeggiators if you want something more complex. And then even now, if you wanted to come over here, let's put a quantizer plugin on and let's add swing to it. We'll see what this does. So that way you could kind of have one arpeggiator feed into another arpeggiator, into another arpeggiator, into a different quantizer. So let me know if that's kind of what you want it to do. But yeah, using the MIDI plugins kind of in a serial nature where one plugin is feeding into another, you can get some really great results for that. Or you see Jazz Dude sharing the link to the Cubase Nation Discord server. Right, Soren just says, Greg, I've slowed down my music work a lot during the summer. It's at a standstill. You always say that one should work with deadlines and move forward with creations. Can you suggest a deadline date for me? I'm making about 10 songs and mostly are ready for mixing and mastering. Not much production to do. Some need vocals, also a date. So say you have 10 songs, give yourself 3 weeks. So think of you're going to approach, so 20 songs. So say 20 days, you have 10 songs. Give yourself 2 days per song. Only work on one song for 2 days. And then all the changes have to be done in 2 days and move on to the next song. Don't go back to the other song. Spend 2 days doing the next song. Get all of your ideas, commit to it, say, okay, this is what it's going to be. At the end of those 2 days, move on to the next song. So 2 days dedicated for each song. and have one day dedicated for, fine tuning all of the different songs and listening to them and kind of evaluate how they all sit in context with each other. So that's what I would do. So if I had 10 songs, I would give myself 21 days. 2 days is a lot to, if you have kind of the nuts and bolts there. We all know, that we can endlessly tweak and modify and enhance the particular sounds of our project until it's never done. And I remember having, a conversation with Hans Zimmer about this, and he's like, it's like, it's like, I wish, it's like the one thing he doesn't like about Cubase is it gives him endless possibilities. And it's really easy to go on forever and keep working on your project. So, make yourself, you don't have to use every feature of Cubase. You can just simply, give yourself that deadline. Imagine, have a friend call you up and say, it's done, at 11 o'clock at night. Set a reminder on your phone, on your computer, on your Alexa device, whatever, and just say, okay, this is done. You can't touch this song until the last day when we're kind of reviewing stuff, just to make sure everything fits in context with each other. So if you have, 10 songs, give yourself 21 days and start from there. And, don't feel like you have to, there's always another song to do where you could do better. But if you don't get anything done, then, that's the whole point, is for us to finish stuff and move on and do better next time. When Michael Wagner, who's like, really, one of the most highly regarded rock producers, engineers, did every huge act in the 80s. He was on one of our Club Cubase Zoom social meetups, and someone asked him about this. And I always remember Michael saying, and someone asked him if he would actually go back and change any of the mixes when he hears them on a radio today. And he's like, that was the best mix for that day. That's the end. And he's like, I don't want to revisit it. It's done. And, we're just, at that point, that was the best mix we could do that day. And now we move on to the next project. So people that work through projects, people that complete projects, that is often their mindset. And that's what they have to do so that they could do more work in the future. So give yourself 21 days for your project. And good luck. I know it's really hard to do. So, and anyone that releases projects, and it's so wonderful to be able to release a project and get it done. All right. So we see from Gerald Ely. Let me find. In your demo of expression maps, you spoke of attributes and directions. Could you demo the difference using one or the other? Yeah, so let's take a quick look. Great, so let me just go back to this example here. All right, so let's come over. So again, events and attributes. So when we go into your expression map, so let's say we get a violins 2 here for our expression map. Okay, so let's go to our expression map setup. All right, so we'll come over here, and so when we come over, so I'm going to just select kind of all of our files here, and then we see here that we could change this to direction. So I'm going to just select all of these here, and we can change these all to direction or all to an attribute. So when we see a musical note, and this changed in Cubase 15. When we see a musical note, that's going to be an attribute. And we see the little arrow, that means a direction. Okay, so let's say if I'm here in this violin part, we'll go to this. Now I want, as we're doing this, we will say, let's change our direction. So let's say measure 22, I want that to switch to tremolo. So I'm going to come right over here and switch to tremolo. And let's do pizzicato, it's more obvious. Now that's going to stay pizzicato until I switch it. So this is, so when I come over here, now I could just come over and we'll say back to spiccato. Now if we wanted to do this, so let's say I have my notes kind of all spread out here. I want to take this, and we could see that we go to articulations and we have none because these are all set for attributes, for directions. So when I want to change these to attributes, again, we'll come over here. Let's get to our expression map setup. And generally, like sometimes when it does it by default, you may have some that are a combination of directions or attributes. So I'm going to switch these all to attributes now. Okay, so now what I could do is select my musical phrases. And we see that these are now matching the length of the notes. So let's say, okay, when it goes to this chord, what I want to do is I'm going to select those particular notes. And now since we could assign the actual articulation based on the notes, I could do note selections, go to my attributes and say, okay, let's come over here and I want this to be legato instead. So if you want the ability to come over and just select like groups of notes, we can just come over here and just say, okay, I want these to be spiccato. I want these to be, so an attribute, we could select the notes, and from our pop-down window here, just simply select the articulations, and that's going to be assigned for the particular note. Whereas in a direction, we'll keep that particular articulation until another direction is entered in. So if you want it always to be strings and maybe just like you always want it to be like legato, and for a few measures you want it to be spiccato, it could be that directions work for that. But if you're kind of going in, I want all of like these notes here to be pizzicato. So I could just select particular notes within a phrase. So let's make those pits. And I want these to be spiccato. So we'll do like the impossible for the violinist. We'll always hate you for doing this. So that, you could just have different articulations for different notes. So attributes are assigned directly to the note. Directions are assigned kind of to the part and will maintain until another articulation, another direction occurs. It will maintain that same articulation until there's a different articulation, either which is an attribute or an event, or an attribute or a direction. So attributes are tied to the notes. Directions are kind of placed in time, and the notes will follow those articulations. Many expression maps will utilize a combination of those two. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Very wonderful to see Sable Winters joining us. Hope you had a great time in Florida at Fort Myers. You're at. All right, so we see Brian Sawyer in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Hope you're well. Hope everything you found a new buyer for your home. That's going good for you, or going well for you, rather. All right, so we see from Parabot 2 says, thanks, Greg. Perfect. That's what I wanted to do with the ARP. Thanks for letting me know. All right, Lucky Dyname or Lucky's the name. Says I need help. My panning won't work. I feel like I tried everything. All right. So when we're doing panning, you want to, we often kind of get this question when it's being routed to a group. So let me just come over here. Let's just do a different project. All right. So often when we're working with groups, let me just utilize this. Okay, so I'm going to put all of these into like a folder. So I'm going to assign all of my drums here to a group channel. Now, when a group channel could be mono or stereo. So when I get this question a lot, it's because the group it's been routed, a track has been routed somewhere that is a mono source. So let's say we listen to my drums. You hear our drums are in stereo. And what I want to do is I'm going to now route these to a group. All right. And I'm going to accidentally set this group to mono. Okay. So now when I play back, I'm going to take my drum track, my kick drum. So let's go ahead and we will solo the track. And now when I go to pan, see if I'll send this to, let's say, my group channel. And all right, so my track is going to a group channel. I go to pan. And as we come over here to pan the track, let me just see if I could create this a little better. Sorry. Assign all these to same thing. I'm just going to assign it all my drums to a group track here. We'll make that a mono group. So make sure that, this isn't going to, one more time, right? Just get our routing correct. Add a group track to the selected tracks, make it mono. So, just check the routing to make sure that it's not going either to a mono output or, like if we had this going to a mono output as opposed to a stereo output, or if something else that it could be like, these are mono sources. So you just take a stereo track here. This may make more sense in stereo for a stereo file. All right, so let's say I route this track to a group that's going to be mono. Okay, so as we come over here, so now I can take this track, and I don't really hear any difference because it's going to a mono group. So make sure that when you're here that you don't. Whereas this, if this group was stereo, I'll now add a stereo group. Add our group track. We're going to make it a stereo. All right, so right now it's routed to group 2. My panning doesn't work. So now I take this track, so now we come here. You don't really hear much change. Now let's send it to group 3, to my stereo group. Now, one other thing that could cause it to kind of behave a little strange with panning is to make sure that that your channel configuration is set to stereo. So let's say, it's mono, should be, but I think it's going to be that you are routing it to like a mono destination, where there's a mono output or a mono group channel, and that's probably affecting your panning. All right, wonderful to see Balsa checking in from Montenegro. Thanks for joining us today, being part of the community. Memento is saying, yeah, France versus Spain is about to kick off, so I think it's just started. So I realize that may affect live stream attendance. I kind of want to watch the game too, so I understand. All right. All right, so we see Jazz Dude sharing a link on making a beat, the ultimate beginner setup with Alice Bino, sharing that. All right, so we see Eddie on drums says, thinks the Beatles worked on a Telefunken M10 4-track recording machine. I thought they used Studers, but I could be mistaken. I have the recording studio equipment book, which is really fascinating. All right, so we see a question. From Boss says, is there a way to have Hypersonic 2 installed and used in Cubase today? I found my old PC with Cubase SX3, and I'm surprised how cool Hypersonic sounds. Yeah, Hypersonic's a classic instrument, so if you could, I believe, I'm not sure if Hypersonic made it to 64-bit or not. Trying to think of the timeline. Yeah, so I think it was probably 64-bit. So if you could get it installed and authorized, you may not be able to authorize it because that might have been, I'm not sure if that was, I think that was, if you have it authorized on your USB-E licenser, I believe it was 64-bit. Then you could just activate the VST2 plugins. So if you're running on an Apple Silicon and you're running in native mode in Apple Silicon, you won't be able to do it. But on Windows, you should be able to. Let me just take a quick look to see if Hypersonic was a 64-bit. It was 64-bit. I think you have a good chance of getting it. To see if there's like the downloads area. Yeah, so it looks like it's like Windows 8, so that would be, I believe that would. There's an ISO image. I think that you could probably. So here it says it doesn't have a native 64-bit version. So you might have to get a bridge like JBridge. It'd be easier if it was 64-bit, but if you have JBridge, you could probably still run it. But you could, if you have your old Windows XP, you could also, if you have like a digital connection, use Steinberg system link also. So, but I'll have to check to see. But I don't always trust the AI overview, but if it was, you may have to do bridging if you wanted the 32-bit version to work, something like JBridge. But it may be more of a hassle than it's worth. And I think Howie and Sonic 7, there's lots of great sounds in there that are pretty equivalent. Or you see just a suggestion from Parabot 2 says, I found that if he commits MIDI sounds to audio, keeps his momentum going forward, or I waste time with all the great but endless options. Keeping the momentum moving forward is the key to my workflow. It's a great insight. Thanks for sharing that. Right, so we see Jazz Dude sharing some links on using logical editor presets triggered by touchpads. Yeah, I think Hans Zimmer was the first one to really kind of utilize that. And I think the first one he had was actually kind of like a shopping machine, like a cashier terminal that fired off keyboard shortcuts that they modified to fit. So. Great. Okay, so we see what is that bar thing next to the open quantize panel E, and how do I disable that? So is it this here? So that's going to be the audio alignment tool. If you don't want to see it, you could just right click in the area here at the top. Right click, and you'll see kind of the setup toolbar, and then you could just see, you can make that particular option disappear for you. Let me know if that's what you're referring to, this right there. All right, so we see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas is here. Hope you're back home and your friend's doing well. Let me know, Michael. I got the Raste installed. Pretty sure I have it installed. So I think it was the like big clear preset you were saying. Let me know kind of what the preset was again. I could take a look at the question you had from last week. Michael's ice cream distribution has begun. All right, so we see Craig Nobles. Hey, Greg, is there a way to force Cubase to quantize to the nearest following beat? Most times it quantizes to the wrong beat. it's almost always to the previous beat. So, quantizing by nature will choose the closest beat. So there really isn't necessarily a way to, so let's take just a look. Right, so say if I come here. All right, so let's say we want to quantize something like that. So generally, quantize will snap it to the closest bar position. So let's say our quantize here we'll set to quarter notes to keep it easy. So let's say I select this particular note and I hit Q. It's going to move it to whatever the closest beat is. It doesn't really determine if it is like closer. So let's delete this note. So if this note is, let's say right roughly in the middle, and if we move this note to start to be earlier, so it snaps to the nearest quantized value, whether it's forward or later, which I think makes sense. So it could be that when you're doing this, maybe, it's ever so slightly. So let's say if we quantize this to eighth notes. All right, so now this is, we look at our position. The start is right on the eighth note. So let's quantize this now to quarter note. And we see that it's going to move to the closest. But if this was one tick earlier, and let's see what happens when we quantize that, it goes back. So, it could be a fraction of a second, but, the quantizing is always going to move it to the closest quantized grid point. So it doesn't necessarily favor, moving forward or going back. It's just whatever is the closest time for that. Great. So let me know if that makes sense, Craig. Great. Michael Teams is helping people with the hot weather with ice cream. Jazz Dudes received 1 gallon of Amaretto Soul ice cream. Okay. Did buy-in be music? Ask. I installed Cubase on M4 Mac for the first time. It installed Rosetta 2. But when I check info, I don't see it as needing Rosetta. The box isn't ticked. Why was Rosetta installed? So, like earlier versions of Cubase, it could depend on which version of Cubase. Earlier in the Apple Silicon, like introduction phase, a lot of people needed to run VST2 plugins. VST3 plugins don't work on on Apple Silicon, so you need to run in Rosetta mode. Apple kind of does this a lot with OS transitions where, sometimes some components you need to run later versions. So a lot of developers have kind of gotten to the point where they have, switched it. So like I think Cubase maybe 11 and 12 defaulted to run in Rosetta mode. and I think 14 and 15 default to, it might be 13, 14, 15 default to Apple Silicon mode. So when you come over here to the applications, let's say, okay, we'll just come over to Cubase 15, and let me just do a get info. So I'm gonna hit Command I. And then here we could choose whether you want to open it using Rosetta or not. I didn't do anything with my 15, and this is automatically installing to run in Apple Silicon mode, but you could specifically choose the application to open in Rosetta if you need to. So Rosetta isn't installed by Cubase. Rosetta is just part of the operating system that will be, I think, disappearing in Mac OS the next generation. So Cubase doesn't install Rosetta. Cubase can run in either Rosetta or Apple Silicon. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, so you see this Jazz Dude has downloaded the whole FTP server with the old plugins in case Steinberg deletes the old plugins and libraries. So yeah, I have a lot of the older, installation discs still that I kind of have in a personal archive. Okay. Okay, so we see follow up on the Rosetta. It says, really, anything else I should check to make sure it's not using Rosetta, but is the Apple Silicon version? So when we come over here, so let's go to the get info command. So if open using Rosetta is unchecked, then you're running it in, at that point, you're running it in Apple Silicon. If it says open in Apple Silicon, then you're running in Rosetta. So you don't see the option to run it in Apple Silicon native mode. It's doing that by default unless you see open using Apple Silicon. All right, so we see from Learn with Steven, it just says, hi Greg, Cubase 14 Pro using PadShop. I tried to drag and drop in a sample. I recorded using my Korg M1 as an audio file in an audio track. Couldn't seem to load it on the other layers. Possible? Let's take a look. I'll start with an instance. We'll just open up a PadShop instance. Just open up a All right, so okay, so here we'll just take this. All right, so let's say I have a WAV file, and let's come over here. Let's just find. So let's say I want to take that particular sound here and drag this to an audio file. Okay, so I could drag it directly from the media bay to PadShop. or we could just, again, come over to, let's open up Pad Shop now. Great. So when I would come here, I just drag into Pad Shop here. So, and you say just can't load it into the other layer. So let's see if there's, let me know if that makes sense or if I'm misunderstanding. So, but just kind of just drag and drop, straight from there, right in. So, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding with that. And we see Jazz Dude just posting link to Gary Gibbons' YouTube channel. It was like a genius with Pad Shop. So always recommend Gary's stuff. It's amazing. All right, we see Lawrence from Rhode Island. Just says, congratulations on your new position. Thank you so much. Very happy to be working directly for Steinberg. All right, so we see from Craig Noble, it says, reason I ask is some string libraries have a delay. By nature, I tend to play ahead of the beat. If you're working with string libraries that are ahead, I'll show you kind of exactly one of the things that we could do with the new, if we were working with like some of the new like expression maps that you could actually, so let's just pop over here. Let me just, right, and here's a template I did that will allow you to handle the offset. So this is like using Iconica Sketch, and there are online resources for this. So let's say if I want to come over to like a trumpet part here. Right, and I'll just do step entry. So, quantizing is often, may not be actually solving the problem for you. So let's say, okay, I want to do quarter notes. Okay, so let's say we have our file doing this. So let's take a listen to, so when we work with, articulations, so like, we could come over and let's go to our expression map setup. So we go to our trumpets, and here we could actually set, so if we're in legato versus staccato, we could have different offsets for each articulation. So and these are available in the Cubase Nation Discord for Iconica Sketch and Iconica Opus. I changed one of the templates that comes with it, and I added all of the articulations. So as we would play back, let's say this particular section, and I'll just put this in a quick loop. So if I wanted to come over here and switch to So, and now at this point, I could just come over and say, okay, I want this to be, legato. So that as we would switch between the different articulations, that each articulation for the string instrument is automatically accommodated for, because each articulation may have different amounts. But if you do your expression map setup, you could, just come over here and work with the articulations for each of the different, the timing offsets, so that you could quantize, and you don't have to play ahead of the beat to try to compensate for the timing discrepancies in different orchestral libraries. So once you get to that set up, and again, if you want to try it with Iconica Sketch, or if you have Iconica Opus, these templates are available to freely download in the Cubase Nation Discord servers. All right, so you see, hi Greg, can you check the email I sent to Club Cubase? Let me take a quick look at it. Log in with my other computer here. Give me just a moment. Log in with authentication. See if I could just open it real quick here. I have kind of like a parallel email. See if it's come in. So I'm not sure when it was sent in. So I have some of these that were sent in. So let me know if any of those. So I think we covered all of these that were sent in. But let me know when you sent it in, or what the topic was about. Be happy to take a look at it for you. All right, so we see Peter Raymond joining from Winnipeg. Yeah, so Soul Sound Official, if you want to let me know if we haven't covered it today. I think the emails we had, I covered it, except for Michael Teams' question about a preset they had in Rasta. All right. So we see the buy-in Gambi Music says, so what's the next version of plugins called? So, if it's, let me clear my throat real quick. So there's VST2 plugins, and in 2008, like 18 years ago, Steinberg introduced VST3 plugins. So VST3 plugins are now what is utilized in Apple Silicon. So it's not necessarily like a new plugin. It's been 18 years. So the next version, or the current version, is VST3. So we see Jazz Dude sharing links to some of the tutorials and templates. As dude just mentioning, Hans Zimmer composed a score for 2000 film Gladiator using Cubase. We watched Gladiator movie last weekend again. Yeah, so Hans has been doing Cubase, I think, maybe 89-ish or so. He did Lion King in 1994 on it. Got to do it again in 2019. All right, so we see from Michael Teams, he just says Rast A, not sure how to pronounce it exactly, says a giant leap is the voice. So let's take a look at that and see. I'll just go to open it up here. So let's go to Sonic. And let me know what the voice was doing, Michael, if you get a chance while you load it up. I'll keep that open. We'll see if we can get clarification what the issue was. Okay. All right, I'll just go ahead and see if I'll just record something with this voice and we'll see if it misbehaves. But let's say I'll just come here. All right. Great, so great to see Randy Lee music on. Great. So we see Soul Sound Official says the email is out for me here. I'll send it again. All right, we'll see if we hear from Michael Teams or if we have other questions. Or is that World Cup is on? So who is everyone rooting for in Spain versus France? So let me know who you're rooting for. Okay, so we see for Michael Team says the voice is dropping out after the project is closed. When you reopen the project, parts of the track would be missing, not all of it, just bits and pieces. Right, Michael Teams is rooting for Spain, probably in alliance with our Hot Mess band members. Let me know if you have. I will just I'll do a new project with that voice and see. But if you have, the actual part, even if you want to just send a song with just a Rasta track, I'd be happy to take a look at it to make sure there isn't something like polyphonic aftertouch. But let's just create an empty track here. That would help. Sorry. Now we'll record some aftertouch here. All right, so I will go ahead and save this, close the project, and we'll listen to it. Seems like not all the parts are playing on that particular voice. You just look, see if there's anything weird in the MIDI list editor, but it doesn't seem to be playing the voices. Praise to you discovered. So let's look in the list editor, see if there's anything. Great, so I'm going to get rid of all the aftertouch here. So let's get to event types. We'll select all, delete, and see if that affects playback. Just make sure it's not, then gets switched to like a monophonic voice or something. See anything that looks playing back. That seems a little strange. I will go ahead and bring that to the attention of the team. I think this is actually done by a different company, but I'll reach out to them and let them know. But you may want to just come over here and but I'll report it to them on your behalf, Michael, and say this patch is behaving a little strangely. Michael Teams is supporting Pablo Gareth Spain's World Cup performance. All right. See, Teams asking for my address, but all right, we'll see if there's more questions that come in. I know the World Cup is going on. Probably a lot of excitement for that as we're getting closer to the finals. See if I think we're out of all of our questions. I'll check again to see if we have Soul Sound officials email, if that came in. Don't see it. So see if that comes in. Not, so we'll give it a minute here. And there's usually about 20 seconds from when I talk to you guys here. See if there's any more questions that come in. If not, we'll wrap up. Disable says she has to play. Great. So we see Fly V says, sorry you missed today, Greg. I'll be back on Friday. Yeah, so definitely just hit the like button and all is forgiven. Okay, so we see Jazzy says, need the new ones, like the last 6 months for the Word file, the indexes. So I'll get tonight's input it, and then I'll send it to you tonight, Jazzy, as soon as or maybe probably tonight. I'll send it to you late tonight so you could have access to it. All right, well, it looks like we are out of questions, so we'll be back on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And if you have questions in advance that you want to send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de, And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. I want everyone to enjoy the World Cup game and have some great questions and make some wonderful music. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back on Friday. Everyone, please take care. Goodbye.